you guys are all very involved in housing policy at different levels. What would be the closest thing to a silver bullet that could, at some point have a positive impact on the housing supply? We'll start with Phil.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you all for being here, by the way. It's important that you're here. You've probably heard me say this before. In Washington, D.C., in terms of public policy, you are either at the table or you are on the menu. So just remember that. There are so many things that could be done to turn the tide of opportunity for all of you and for the customers that you serve. Let me just give you one example. From 2010 to 2022, the Federal Reserve purchased about 90% of all mortgage-backed securities produced in America, and they did so at interest rates that they managed to drive interest rates down to stimulate the economy. That was a project that the Federal Reserve called quantitative easing. And then all of a sudden, 2022, they decided, I call it quantitative squeezing, where they started raising interest rates to battle inflation, but the impact on the opportunity for consumers to qualify for mortgages has been devastating. So, and I saw in the President's State of the Union where he recommended a $10,000 incentive for existing homeowners to be able to list their home and sell them, a tax incentive if they were to give them that incentive to list and sell their home. While it's a noble, interesting thing, it's not the silver bullet. I can tell you what the silver bullet would be in my opinion. It's very simple. The Federal Reserve needs to stand up what I would call a specified pool of mortgages. They did it for 12 straight years. They could do it again easily and allow the consumers who have an existing property to meet the inventory crisis in America. They could easily stand up a pool of mortgages for anyone who has an existing mortgage at 2.5% or 3% that won't list their home because they don't want to trade up to a 7. They could easily stand up a pool of mortgages to match their interest rate on those consumers so that they could jump to the next home with a matching interest rate. That wouldn't be very difficult. It doesn't take tax legislation. It doesn't take any kind of, it's just a policy process that the Federal Reserve could implement immediately, and that would be the silver bullet, I would say, that would change the inventory crisis in a minute.
Thank you.
Alex, thanks for the question. I'm part of the National Association of Home Builders, as you see on the screen behind me, but I'm part of a team of lobbyists, and we're working each and every day to address our driving point on housing affordability. So thank you for the question. I wish there was a silver bullet, Alex. I look at a couple of things that I echo the points Phil made. I would say there's a transformer shortage out there. We are desperate for electrical distribution transformers, and we can't find them. And there are developments, many developments around the country where the homes are built and our members cannot turn the lights on because of the shortage of distribution transformers. I would also point to the tax bill that is making its way through Congress. For the multifamily builders out there, extremely important, the low-income housing tax credit, which the President did echo support for in his State of the Union address. That tax bill includes a number of really key provisions. We're hopeful the Senate will take that up and pass it and have it sent to the President. The last thing that I would say, and this is probably more at the state or the local level, the permit fees and the cost of regulation. We're looking at 95 roughly thousand in regulatory and permitting costs before the home is even constructed. Wow. So if there are things that we can do to relax those regulations and relax those fees and encourage builders to get out and provide the American dream, we're all for that.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for having me here. It's an honor to be with you all today. I thought Phil said it really well. Interest rates is the first and foremost thing I think of from a silver bullet perspective that's impacting the industry. And a big part of that is driven by, if you look at the housing stock in the country, their numbers are anywhere between 2 and 4 million houses that were underbuilt, and that's continuing to grow. So if you compound that with people not wanting to leave their existing homes, it just creates a bigger problem, and the supply and demand continues to be a real challenge. I think the other things that we see really, and you mentioned it, like the lot cost and the amount of money it takes to just start a home has gone up dramatically, and that has a big impact on builders' cost. A lot of builders, I just had a chance last week to spend time with some builder executives, and that was their single biggest concern into the future is their lot vintages and how upside down they're going to be able to sell those houses and those lots that they had to overpay for and the cost to develop those. So that's an area I think we can make a big impact on.
Oh, please,
Alex, if I could just add one more issue that I neglected, and the worker shortage problem. I mean, our data would suggest we're about 450,000 workers short of where we need to be in the construction industry to build the American dream. There are programs like Job Corps that our Home Builders Institute is part of. And some of those funds and the appropriations process were eliminated, and we're trying to get those restored. But we need workers, we're desperate for workers, and we need training and skills, folks to come into the industry. We're desperate for workers. That's the silver bullet. We're desperate for workers.
We were having a great conversation backstage, and we were talking about different influences, different dynamics that are impacting the construction of a house, whether it's from the cost of building materials, the lumber, workforce dynamics, as you were talking about, and the need for skilled labor, different development options that are out there, modular, financing options. In your guys' experience and what's happening right now and what you guys have seen out there in the marketplace, are there any innovative developments that people have implemented that you guys have been able to participate in that's having a direct impact on this issue?
Well, I think there are innovative solutions in the percolation stage, but none that are really ready to, as I would say, fire off into the marketplace. There are some very innovative activities that are being undertaken in the private sector. I might just mention that the previous panel, but before I do that, let me just mention something that Lake said. If you didn't hear that correctly, let me just reiterate it. The average regulatory and compliance cost to build the average new home in America is $94,000 per house. We won't have affordable housing in America if the builder knows it's going to experience $94,000 of regulatory and compliance costs to build the average home before they put the shovel in the ground. I hope my friends from the National League of Cities are not here today, so I'm going to make this comment. Frankly, every city, there needs to be incentive, and part of that incentive is the federal government providing benefits to the 35,000 cities of America. They do that every year in CDBG grants and other kinds of federal supplement. And when I get elected housing czar, which isn't going to be soon, but nevertheless, when I do, I would like to implement a program where these cities don't get the federal funding that they normally would get any year unless they develop a plan to mitigate or remove some of those impediments to affordable housing so that we can lower those $94,000 of costs. And I think we need innovation and incentive combined together to maybe intervention to take care of that. I would like to maybe just mention a couple of things. There are a few of you out there, I know, that are working on other kinds of innovation. Last year, the MBA reported that the average cost to produce a mortgage in America had risen to $13,000 per loan. In 2009, that was $3,500. So even with all the technology and improvement in process, et cetera, it still costs way too much to produce mortgages. And I know there are some of you out there working on some really innovative solutions about that, and I encourage you to keep doing it. But the innovation there is innovation coming. I can mention one other thing that I would like to see happen, whether we do it here in this room, and maybe we could. I think America needs a single-family housing inventory coalition. We need an organized sort of solidarity movement about building the solutions to single-family inventory in America. Because if we don't solve that, we're not going to solve affordable and accessible home ownership. But that's a really strategic imperative, I think.
Thank you. Wait, go ahead.
No, I can just mention briefly, only because I caught this article over the weekend, and if there's anyone from Montana out there, I know that Governor Gianforte and the legislature put forward a number of waivers of permits and reduced regulatory burdens, and we saw there was a housing task force created among builders and other personnel in the state, and we saw an increase because Montana is desperate for housing, and the economy out there is growing. Home prices are, no pun intended, through the roof there, and this effort reduced permit fees and eliminated some of this regulation. So the builders had an incentive out there in Montana to increase their building.
Yeah, I agree with everything both of you just said. We come at it from a little bit different angle just because of where we sit in the industry. And I think one area we've seen become very successful is the off-site manufacturing, where we can build roof trusses or wall panels or different products in a conditioned facility that allows the building process to happen quicker and reduce cycle times, which is a good thing for builders. One of the things we've coupled with that is we partnered with the Building Talent Foundation, which is doing a lot of great work. If you haven't heard of them, look them up. They're mostly privately funded through private organizations like ours and a lot of the home builders, but they're doing an excellent job and starting to train up our next generation of trades in the industry. So really happy to be part of that as well, which I think will make an impact.
You know, we spoke a little bit about the labor issue that you guys are experiencing out there that's having an impact on affordable housing. From the national home builder perspective, what are you guys doing to be able to address that particular issue? Are there any programs or things that are coming out that are helping to address that? And then the second part of that, maybe Phil and Mike can jump in here, is from a policy perspective, is there any legislation that's coming out to help ease that? Maybe vocational training programs or anything that's coming out to kind of address that issue?
Great question, Alex. We have the Home Builders Institute. They are our training affiliate within NAHB, and we are working to address that shortage of skilled workers. We are working, for example, with Home Depot on an arrangement to train workers, military veterans, that are coming back to the United States or wherever they're stationed, and give them a skill in construction. So we're working, the two of us, on that. But I mentioned the Job Corps, and this is something that keeps me awake at night. The Department of Labor has a program known as Job Corps. It works to train disadvantaged youth and provide that opportunity in a pre-apprenticeship, give them a skill. Become a carpenter, become a laborer, become an electrician, and it's on the path to entrepreneurship, the way that you could own a business in the construction trade. The opportunities are so there for this, but we need the funding through the appropriations process. And what the House bill did was to eliminate funding for Job Corps. It's a $1.7 billion program. And we've been working ever since to try to get that funding restored in the fiscal year 24 budget. And we're hopeful going forward for the FY25 that Job Corps will get full funding. So those are just two examples of things that our Home Builders Institute is doing to address the worker shortage.
Phil, do you want to address that a little bit? Because I know you work a lot in legislation. From a NAHB perspective, because I think we've got over 200 NAHB members that are going to be visiting the Hill tomorrow. What could we be doing as a NAHB organization to help this particular issue out from a legislative policy standpoint?
Yep. I heard Jason Rivero in the previous panel remind all of you that the more you can focus on the consumer as opposed to your own corporation or personal benefit from any piece of legislation or regulation. It's really important to focus on the consumer. I want to just mention, Lake just said that about the Job Corps issue. The Home Builder Institute has been for decades working desperately with state and local home builder associations as well to build the platform for building trade folks to enter the marketplace. But without this Job Corps capability, we're going to get further behind. I think that's a really important component. It's consumer focused. It's focused on the population that needs employment the most, and that really, to me, is a really major initiative. I know that all of you are watching with great anxiety, I suspect, about all of the issues, the legislative and issues, or the legal issues about the NAR lawsuits, et cetera. And I do think it's important for you to express to your members of Congress that, the uncertainty in this marketplace is not healthy. We need a solution for that, and we need practical solution. Just academic, issues that don't add value to a marketplace where there's already a great deal of issues that you deal with every day. I just also wanted to mention one other thing. We heard the Deputy Secretary and the FHA Commissioner talk about the FHA 203K program. Pardon me. I just wondered, if you get the chance, you need to emphasize the ability for that program to meet your needs of affordable property in your communities. The cities own so much single-family properties that are vacant and won't be rehabilitated unless we get the ability for municipalities and other nonprofits to be able to take those properties, use a 203K mortgage with the improvement money in the single 30-year fixed rate closed transaction, and then rehabilitate the property, and those loans are assumable to owner occupants. Which, by the way, from a policy perspective, that's one thing that I would emphasize for when you're meeting with members of Congress. We need a absolute strong as can be first look program for owner occupants so that they have a fair chance to compete with the institutional investors buying single family homes. So a lot of those things are innovative, but they're really important to you.
I love that. Mike, I want to come back to you for just a second here. You have a unique perspective because you come to it from the procurement point of view. And I know we were talking backstage and you said that you provide lumber and other building materials for most of the major home builders across the United States. Do you see any relief in the future to the cost of lumber, to the cost of delivering your services to home builders? Would that have an impact on the housing affordability issue?
Yeah, I mean, lumber is generally the single most costly product that goes into building a home. And I think the concerns that we see from a regulatory perspective, it probably put more upward pressure on cost than downward pressure. And some of the tariffs that are in place today are going to continue to cause a challenge from an affordability perspective until we get that figured out. If you look back along 10 years ago, those tariffs were put in place to protect competitive dumping and some of the things where we were being anti-competitive with Canada and those types of things. almost all the mills in the U.S. are owned by Canadian companies now. So that whole issue is probably gone from where it was, and we still haven't addressed it. So I think that's a big opportunity for us to look to bring down some costs.
All right, we just have a few minutes here left. We talked about a lot of things here today, from the cost to building materials to skill, lack of skill and training programs out there. If you guys were to rate, your top 2 things that we should be focused on right now that would have the most direct impact in the next, 6 to 12 months, can you maybe, share your top 2 and maybe talk a little bit about what it would take to implement that? We'll start with Mike, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this one. I mean, my number one would be let's get after interest rates and figure out how to bring that into from an affordability perspective. I love Phil's idea around creating that pool of money for the Federal Reserve to be able to use for mortgages. I think would make a huge impact. I think the second area is really around labor, and I think finding ways to be creative with labor. Probably the most frustrating days of my life were here lobbying for H-2B visas, where you talk to everybody. Regulatory or reform around immigration is a huge deal. Being able to bring in legal labor and make that simpler access for employers and for the labor to have a good, well-paying job is a real challenge. And when I was lobbying for that, it was everybody agreed with the issue, but wouldn't do it unless the other side did something. This is an area that impacts all of us, so we need to find a way to stop politicizing issues that impact the entire country.
Thank you.
Alex, I think my answers are very much the same as Mike. I think I almost would put the worker shortage issue at the top, because we are so in a shortage for workers to come into the trade that I might put that as number one, because I don't with the demand for housing that is going to go up over time. I think we just are desperate for the workers. So I put that at number one, and thanks for addressing the immigration issue, the H-2B, and when will Congress ever agree again to take on a more comprehensive approach? We really need to have Congress look at that, because we need a long-term solution. The interest rates, number 2. I think that I just feel over time those rates are going to start to decline. And if there ever was a time to buy a house due to prices going up, I think you absolutely want to buy a home now, because I do think in a number of months, maybe a year, those rates will be back, not to where they were before, in the 2s, but I do think maybe in the 5s. So I think interest rates are number 2, and I got to put my third. I know you asked for 2, but building materials is number 3, and we got to find the electrical infrastructure. We've got to be able to address the long-term lumber, because I do think the tariffs are going to go up at some point, and building materials, labor, and the interest rates. I put it.
Phil?
Let me start with this. You probably heard, some of you, Chris Herbert here on stage yesterday from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing. The demographic study that they produce tells us that 85% of new household formation in America over the next 20 years will be people of color. We need emphasis in America on supply. We need a real emphasis on inventory of affordable single-family homes. There's a lot of attention today in America about the demand side, but demand is going to grow, no question about that. And yes, we need affordability, but we need accessibility too. And if we don't have affordable single-family homes at the supply that people need them to have effectively be able to shop, that's a real impediment. So I just feel like that and some of these policies, policymakers we could fix some of this stuff rather easily. As I said, the First Look program, the the ability for the Federal Reserve to stand up a specified pool of mortgages, and maybe incentives for home builders to do more affordable property as well. That would require tax incentives, et cetera. But don't give up. There's wonderful opportunity. You're in the right field, doing the right thing for the people, constituents that need it the most, and God bless you for doing what you're doing.
All right, folks, I want to thank you so much for being here today. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.